You want to be the president of the United States, right?
Right.
You want to. So,
Why?
yes.
Why?
Why? Why is a good question. Let's start with that.
Well, I didn't spend my lifetime thinking that I should be president or wanting to. And it was really during the pandemic I just started thinking, because I was being very, very heavily censored during the pandemic. So I was removed from Instagram. I was, I had been on, at one point I had a very, big presence on mainstream media. I was publishing very often in the New York Times and all the other mainstream newspapers, and I was a frequent guest on every side, on Fox and on CNN, MSNBC, and all the networks. And then when I started saying things that were controversial about the lockdowns and other things, I was censored very heavily. And I was removed. My Instagram account that had almost 1 million followers on it was removed. And I was, I had a book out on Anthony Fauci that didn't get a single review, although it sold 1 million copies within 3 months. It was the biggest bestseller of the year, 17 weeks, the top bestseller, and yet it didn't get a single review, and I wasn't allowed on any television show to talk about it. Oh, I was watching a lot of this, and the war started, and I, had a lot of objections to the war in Ukraine. But I couldn't talk about any of these things. So I thought, if I was running for president, I have a big enough following that I could qualify for the debates, and I could raise enough money that they'd have to let me on the debates and let me talk to the American people for the first time. But it wasn't like a notion that I was going to do. It was just an idea. And a guy called Jeremy Zogby, who runs one of the biggest polling firms in the country, contacted me. I'd never met him before, but he had been polling my name, just throwing my name into a lot of different polls across the country, and the results were really astonishing, despite the fact that I'd had thousands of articles written about me, all of them negative. Literally for 5 years, I didn't get a single good article, and I had thousands and thousands of attacks and mischaracterizations. My assumption was that among the general public, my polling would be as low as you could get, in the negative probably. But it wasn't. It was actually, in terms of popularity, it was ahead of anybody that they were polling, which astonished me. And
the polling, and I've read a little bit about the polling. The polling isn't it amongst independents though, right?
No, this was polling. I didn't know he was doing this polling, and he did several different kinds of polls. He polled me among Democrats, and then among the general electorate to see how I would do in a primary.
Right.
And then to see how I do in a general election, and then just favorability ratings. My favorability was it was the number one person. There was about 28 people like DeSantis and Trump and Biden, but they also had Pope Francis on there. They had Elon Musk. They had Greta Thunberg, and people who were pretty popular. My popularity rating, my favorability rating was higher than anybody's, which shocked me. And I thought, well, a lot of these people who they're asking probably think they're my dad, that I'm my dad.
Right.
There's probably a number of people
Your
out
name,
there,
your brand is...
Right. Who, because anybody who read any article for that 5-year period would have a negative point of view of me. So then we did some more. He was trying to convince me to run, which I didn't have any...
aspiration?
No. And then when the war started, I was pretty alarmed that the Democratic Party had now become the pro-war party. The Democratic Party was always anti-war, and I saw why it was happening. That their funding was all coming from Raytheon and General Dynamics and Lockheed and Boeing and Northrop Grumman and BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, all of these big companies that make their living, make money, part of the military.